what Valve did is, instead of adopting the penalty, they simply took the points and they said, if you have that many points, maybe then you're banned for life, which is, of course, again, like, this is a facepalm on my side, okay? Because this does not make any sense. And again, you know, as Good says in the chat, it's the Wild Wild West.
Guys, I'm really looking forward to this next interview because in esports, especially over the last week or so, we've started to realize that there's actually been quite a lot going on in terms of investigations into potential match fixing from players in Counter-Strike, and it's also been sort of hinted that these players have transitioned across to Valorant. So it is something that directly affects the integrity of this scene that we love so much, and as such, beggars a deeper discussion. And to help us with that, I mean, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Anna Bowman, who is the EVP of Esports at Rec Global. If you follow her on Twitter, you'll see great cooking and a lot of fandom for the team that is Rogue. But Anna, we have you here today. Very pleased to get you on board finally.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Now, for those that, you know, perhaps like me, or, you know, deal with video games just as video games and haven't really had the chance to perceive so much of what goes on at the competitive level, dealing with integrity, dealing with sort of outside actors and all this kind of stuff. What can you tell us about your involvement in esports as a lawyer, first and foremost, but also with Rec Global more broadly?
Yeah, so maybe I start with Rec Global first, and then we get into the legal stuff a bit more. But as Goods would say, 2 years ago, I decided to move to the dark side in esports and basically dissolve my private practice, my legal private practice, mostly representing players, stakeholders in esports. I was also quite engaged already back then in integrity topics, and I actually accepted a job on the team side. So now I'm EVP Esports, as you said, at Rec Global, overseeing their esports properties. Hence, lots of fandom for Team Rogue because I'm managing Team Rogue, in fact. So we're doing quite well at the moment, but also our Call of Duty franchise, London Royal Ravens. So that's my day job. However, I'm still very engaged as a lawyer in the community, in esports, in sports. And of course, I have this very deep background in integrity matters. I even once or twice represented players who were involved in the match fixing topics, so I know a thing about it or two. I'm also involved in ESIC, the Esports Integrity Commission, so I'm a judge on their disciplinary panel. What does that actually entail? I think it's always so great because ESIC is basically a sporting body that is very similar to a sports court, where you sometimes have violations of their codes. They have an anti-corruption code, for example, and then players are sanctioned under this code if the tournament organizer is a member of ESIC. And in those cases, when the player is not happy with the outcome of the disciplinary action, they can actually appeal, and then they might end up with me as a judge on the panel overseeing the case. So it's quite exciting, at least for me, because every time I'm involved in a case like this, I feel like, you know, very loyally again, and also feel the responsibility. So yeah, it's quite exciting. I'm still quite tied to the legal community.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, at least first off, Anna, great to have you on the show, and we'll definitely set the premise as, you know, you talked about you're definitely on the judge panel or whatnot for the ESIC, but we're not going to get into like the nitty gritty and details of like going into this investigation. We want to make it clear that we're really just talking you and asking questions from a lawyer's perspective, and potentially educate more about match fixing, what's the definition of it, and you know, educate us as players trying to grow into the scene too, that it's a no-no, but how is it a no-no, right? So first off, let's get into that and talk about that definition of that match fixing, right? And you mentioned you had to represent 2 players in the past. Was that specifically in CS:GO, or was it in something else? But let's define what match fixing is here.
Yeah, so let's talk about fixing first. Match fixing basically means that someone engages in conduct that corrupts either the outcome of a game or then corrupts basically the betting process that's attached to the competitive process. So you have basically 2 parts. You have one, the corruption itself, where someone influences a game, its progress or outcome. I mean, of course, legal definitions can be super vast and long. I don't know if you guys want to, but I can even read to you the definition under the anti-corruption code with ESIC. I think it's quite interesting to hear,
Yes,
how deeply lawyers think about this. So just the corruption part is defined as follows. It says, fixing or contriving in any way or otherwise influencing improperly or being a party to any agreement or effort to fix or contrive in any way or otherwise influence improperly the result, progress, conduct, or any other aspect of any match, including without limitation by deliberately underperforming therein. So I mean, I hope not everybody, fell asleep by now, but it's really, I'm just reading this to you so maybe our audience can understand how complicated this topic is. We really want to basically cover everything that is improper conduct. And again, depending on from what side you're looking at this, I mean, this can be a regulation from a tournament organizer. And I guess later on, we can also speak about prosecution, basically proper public prosecution and what's the public interest there. But coming back to the second part of your question, I'm already talking too much. I'm a lawyer, sorry.
This is
No,
fine.
it's perfect. I love this.
So coming to the second part, yes. So my clients, they were all in CSGO. It was like the high profile, match fixing in the early era of Counter-Strike. And that was particularly interesting because, of course, back then there was no regulation in place. And so representing those players was a bit less straightforward, I would say, as it would be today.
And just to tie into what you were saying about the definition of corruption, we talked about how it's engaging the conversation or even anything that shows underperformance for a team that could literally throw a match. But does it have to have a reward tied into it to that sense? Like, for example, right now there's match fixing and there's betting with, for example, cryptocurrency, or back then it was with CSGO skins.
Right?
Exactly, with skins. If there's no form of payment in there, like if there was no betting whatsoever, would this still be like a big issue still? I mean, I guess so, because you're talking about integrity of the game.
Why else would you throw?
I mean, at least under the ESIC conduct, it would be because the integrity of the game itself is protected. That's basically the goal you pursue. If we're talking from a law and order perspective, what's prosecuted under most laws, you would look for a monetary damage. So you could qualify this as committing fraud. Usually, and this can be anything, right? This can be prize money. So it's the corruption act itself. And then, somebody is basically defrauded of prize money. But this can be also the betting part. And when we're talking about monetary value, this can be also, of course, skins. This can be crypto, whatever.
So I guess it's still important for the audience to know that, if you're not match fixing or betting, but for the integrity from ESIC's code of conduct, is that even if you don't get payment or whatnot for match fixing, you're still going to be not in trouble probably from a federal court perspective or whatnot, but could still be in trouble from the code of conduct with ESIC, at least in the CS:GO scene for now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You should always play to the best of your ability. I think most rules and regulations, honestly, that are being out there by publishers, tournament organizers, ask that of any team or player participating in the games. And that's what's expected. That's also what the audience, what the fans expect, right? We want to see a fair game.
Good games, yeah.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
want Uber to scream all the fucking time. You want Uber to shout, literally.
Yeah. I guess because it's such a complicated and nuanced topic, and there's so much going on. Obviously, it's a big talking factor with the investigation and stuff. For you personally, what do you think is like the biggest like misunderstanding or misconception that you hear that you almost want to set straight? Because there is so much going on, and there's a lot of like hearsay through the grapevine kind of thing that I feel that the facts can often get just ruined, I suppose, I guess, just because of that kind of how nuanced and complicated it can be.
Well, I think for me, the most important part is really that people understand that one, there's a difference whether I commit a corruptive act just on behalf of the result or the progress of the game, and then when it's about the betting part and the money part. And that's the one thing. And the other thing is, I think where people get easily mixed up is whether we're discussing this topic through the legal lens, through the public prosecution lens. So this is where we basically apply the laws which are applicable in said territories. So with the recent scandal, we're talking about the US. So US laws are applicable. Or whether we are talking about sanctions under regulations from the publisher or tournament organizer. And this is, again, when we're talking about tournament organizer and publisher, this is very confusing to people. And honestly, I can't blame them, because it really usually requires a deep understanding of the ecosystem and who makes which rules and how are they actually applied. I will give you an example of that where it gets really confusing. Counter-Strike is the prime example. You have Valve as a publisher, pretty hands-off. Especially in the early days, for example, there were not, like official rules or anything. Of course, you have terms of use when you start playing the game. But for the competitive scene, you have nothing. Okay, and then you have rules from the tournament organizers. And what actually happened in the early days, when you had, some minor and some major cases of match fixing, where we're talking about a couple of skins. In some cases, we talk about maybe damage of, let's say, 50 USD or something. It's not much. In those cases, the players were, one could say, only subject to the regulations from the tournament organizers. However, once Valve got wind of it, for example, with Abba Power and Richard Lewis reporting on it, Valve blacklisted them in one announcement. And that was like without rules existing previous to that. And of course, when you look at that as just, a player or fan following the scene, it's pretty hard to understand actually who makes the rules, how are they applied, and how does, for example, Valve have the right, to do something like this, to ban players for life without even rules being in existence.
So, I mean, on that note, like, I'd love to know sort of your informed opinion on these sort of punishments, how they're handed out, outside of, the sort of legality and outside of quantifying damages incurred as a result of match fixing. But I'm interested a little bit more on your take on how these publishers, as arbitrators of their own law inside their own ecosystems, make these decisions. Because obviously Brax, for example, was blanket banned from Counter-Strike and was allowed to compete in Valorant, right? This did not overlap. I guess first of all, I'd love to know your opinion on the severity as someone who is involved in the ecosystem, your opinion on the severity of the ban from Valve's end, and also what you think about sort of Riot not upholding that and giving him an opportunity to still compete.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. So the first part touches upon how publishers generally apply the rules, and if it's a good thing that publishers not only make their own regulations, but they apply it at the same time, and there is no, third independent instance reviewing it. One of the big topics in that regard is that, of course, you can always make the point that usually these decisions are in the interest of the publisher in terms of protecting the integrity of the game, which is entirely fair. But in some cases, we have seen decisions by publishers that were disproportionate, I would say. I think you probably can't even debate that, especially in these early decisions where, there were only minor events and it led to lifelong bans. I think that's pretty unquestionable that's disproportionate. The game publisher, of course, wants to protect its game. You need the deterring effect on the players, on other players, looking at what can happen even if you slip up once in a minor way. So, so that's one topic where I'd say, be aware, game publishers have no mercy when it comes to these things.
Protecting the game.
Protecting the game, protecting the product, totally understandable. It's their product.
Is there a precedent that you can apply from traditional sports, though, that sort of sets a framework for how severe these punishments could be? Like, is there a world where we can transcribe this to esports and inform publishers on maybe a less arbitrary way of enforcing these decisions?
This is such, oh my God, it's like great legal show here. I love it. So I'm a German lawyer, so I can only speak to basically the European context and European law. And we have lots of case law where basically the European Court of Justice in sports had to decide whether penalties in sports were proportionate or not. So now, usually, a penalty that prevents you for life, for example, in a first offense case, that's usually considered disproportionate, even if we're talking about something as severe as match fixing. So now the question is, can we apply these cases to esports? And I think we probably can if we consider esports similar to sports. So we just look at it as a competition. However, you can never disregard the fact that we're talking about esports as a product that is being owned by the publisher. So there are rights attached here too that probably could also make a very strong point that all these rules should not be applicable because we're simply talking about a product and your rights to protect it. So it's a very interesting topic. I even know lawyers who are currently writing their PhD on exactly this topic. It's super cool. So, but it is quite uncertain and a gray area. So now I have gotten so excited that I forgot. Oh, the second part. That basically, basically the question: what do I think about players moving games to escape their rulings? Well, that just shows another, I think, challenge of the esports ecosystem as a whole. We do not have these overarching rule sets. I think ESIC is already doing a great job, where many stakeholders across games can be members, but of course they still need to convince everybody to come on board. So this can be one solution, but many publishers are not part of it. So I think on the one hand, it's a bad thing that, you do not have this overarching body. On the other hand, looking at some rulings and looking at, how should I put that, how disproportionate I find some of these rulings, it might be better for the publishers to just keep it separate. I I find that this entire field is still severely under-evolved, honestly, underdeveloped. Yeah.
I guess the follow-up question there is that if we have or have had disproportionate punishments in the past, from your perspective, what would a proportionate punishment be? Like, I think people look at it and go, oh, X player match fixed, he's going to jail. Like, there's a lot of people that aren't quite sure the context of what these punishments would be. So, generally speaking, like, what kind of lines are people expecting?
Yeah, I think a good example is what actually happened to the iBuyPower guys and another guy called Joey Schlosser, in the early days. ESL unbanned them after 2 years on the recommendation of ESIC, because that case was basically then reconsidered. ESL, they're a German company, and you can say many things about ESL, but they also want to comply with the laws. And that was definitely the consideration there, that they wanted to find a proportionate result. Now, well, I found that it was proportionate to unban them after 2 years. It really didn't help the players much because, as you know, they were still blacklisted from majors. So they couldn't play. And it was basically still the end of their career. And honestly, the problem, at least in the Counter-Strike universe, continues because now we have these new cases, and this is not particular match fixing. This is more about the spectator bug and coaches exploiting the spectator bug. So in that context, ESIC had developed a point system, how often and how severely this was, how many offenses there were. And depending on how many points you got, you basically got an according penalty. Now, what Valve did is, instead of adopting the penalty, they simply took the points and they said, if you have that many points, maybe then you're banned for life, which is, of course, again, like, this is a facepalm on my side, okay? Because this does not make any sense. And again, as Good says in the chat, it's the Wild Wild West. Yeah.
Just to give context, actually, to chat about the spectator bug, right, in CSGO. So basically what happens is that, we have coach slots in CSGO, which unfortunately we don't have yet for Valorant, but it's going to be coming soon, chat. Don't worry about it. But basically there was a certain bug where it would allow for the coach to be in free float mode at a certain position in a spawner, for example, right? So you could kind of tell if they're trying to want to abuse it, they're going to say, hey, there's actually one guy heading towards this way, because technically, I guess they're not really monitoring the conversation in, for example, T-Speak or whatnot between the coaches and the players, right? For these online games. So then the coach could really say, hey, they're rotating back towards the B side. If they're actually coming back through spawn, you see one towards mid. So it breaks the integrity of the sport that way. So that's a gist of what the coaching bug was. And a lot of coaches got caught doing that. There was a whole
basically
list
a
of it
cipher
before.
cam, wasn't it? Really,
literally, that's how the meme of the cipher cam came out, basically, for Valorant, and it was a huge list about that. So thanks for the clarification for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can just add that, because it's quite a fascinating topic. When looking into these cases, of course, you have, these obvious cases where you basically could tell, oh, yeah, the position where the coach was, that he could really oversee the game. But you would also have these instances where they had the bug, but maybe they were facing a wall or they couldn't see anything, right? And but that would still, trigger some of these points that were then, rewarded, because the obligation under the regulation is that you're basically reporting it immediately to the guy overseeing the game, right? So this is why it's so unfortunate what's happening here. Yeah. Anyway.
No, for sure. And just to get back on what you were saying here, Anna, about like how disproportionate things are, and looking at the severity of some of these cases, and where it's like petty skins for $50 up to X amount. Now we're looking at the topic where, to get back towards not North America, but into the CSGO world, the FBI is currently being involved in the investigation. So are you able to tell us how severe this is right now that we have?
Why? Why
exactly
has it gotten to that point? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why this is so severe is obviously because we are talking about betting fraud potentially on a big scale. This is a big deal.
Mm.
Betting fraud in general, it's always something really bad attached to wherever you are going to have competitive games. Doesn't matter whether it's esports or sports. So this is really why it's a big deal. And then, of course, I'm not sure what the exact penalty is under the codes applicable in the US, but I mean, I've scanned through a couple of laws in preparation to this show, and so usually the penalty for something like betting fraud can be up to 10 years imprisonment. So it is considered a severe violation of public interests to commit that. It's a big deal, and I think we're just at the beginning of that in esports. I guess it probably has already happened for all the time esports has been around. Just because betting was available, monetary gain was available over the past years. But that's all the reason why it's so important that we have good regulations, good bodies that can actually prosecute that, and that it's not only not only the FBI, but that we as the stakeholders protect the integrity of our games.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is it the severity of the offense that potentially has been caused that has triggered the FBI's involvement? Because obviously they're not arbitrarily going to delve into this situation themselves unless presumably the transgression is quite severe. Yes.
Usually, it depends. I think when we're talking about crime in most countries, you have crimes that will be prosecuted just because there is a public interest in its prosecution itself. That's usually the case by anything where you have damage in terms of a monetary value. So the moment they have a suspicion that there could be criminal activity, they have the obligation to investigate.
Okay.
Yeah. And yes, the suspicion would be here that there is some monetary value involved of relevance.
Sufficient proportion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess it comes down to also again, since we are really into the Valorant scene, and there's potential that what's happening with ESIC and the FBI in North America might bleed into the scene for whatever rumors are happening here in the Valorant scene. If it doesn't get to the severity of going to jail, what's like the biggest fear that these players might have to look out for if they're caught doing what they were doing in CS with the ongoing investigation?
I think from a publishers and tournament organizers side, it's definitely a lifelong ban. It seems, there is a pretty firm stance there. And then, of course, from a prosecution side, it can be anything between, a monetary penalty to a very long imprisonment. Generally, also, the damage to your reputation is immense, and we are seeing this with players, who are being prosecuted or who have received a penalty in the past. They are really damaged goods, and it's very tough for them to ever find again a job. It's very, very tough. Hence, it's so important that we really think about this. Not only from a penalty perspective, but really what we can do in the scene to prevent this. I think looking at sports, I think in some sports they're light years ahead when it comes to betting fraud prevention. There needs to be a lot of education. This type of crime is very complex, but it's also very easy for people who are organized, because you have very young individuals who are easily
Hmm.
impressible in an esports context, who you can easily make dependent on your opinion. I believe you can really easily take influence on them, and and I don't see, since esports is not as organized as traditional sports, you don't have these seminars for players who are maybe 13, 14, 15, in which you get explained, hey, whenever someone approaches you and maybe first they want to support you, but later on they ask for something in return, for example, throwing a match or just not playing to your best efforts, that this is really not okay, and that they have someone to reach out to. It's like we really don't have this infrastructure in place in most
So
games, I believe.
it's a good time to put the Twitch ads to start talking about like esports integrity and match fixing scandals instead of like Captain Morgan's ads that I'm getting, or McDonald's instead. Would be a
I
good
mean, they're
place to start,
tailored to
dude.
you, by the way, James. That's because you eat like crap and you
McDonald's.
just
I
you
haven't
drink,
I haven't
so,
been to McDonald's
yeah.
in forever. But I guess
Look, you've been clean eating for like 3 days, bro. I don't want to hear it. Okay.
Well, I'm doing keto. It's like it's not allowed for me. So
Oh, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I've done keto before as well.
Now, we have also heard recently that Riot are conducting their own investigations into this as well. What is the purpose of this? Is this performative? Are Riot trying to indemnify themselves? Are they trying to shed liability? What is the purpose of Riot launching their own independent investigation into these allegations or against CS:GO players that are transitioned into Valorant? What does this achieve?
I think it's really, and I'm saying this without any insider knowledge, really.
Sure.
But so I think this is really, on the one hand, to protect themselves, but it's also, I believe, to find a good footing and a good approach with regards to that topic. Honestly, like in no other game you will have seen, I believe, a publisher making a statement like this, where they say like, oh, okay, this is actually a topic, people are transitioning, but they might be um, morally too corrupt to participate in our game. We don't
Sure.
want them in our game because they clearly displayed behavior in the past that make them not worthy, or they propose a risk to our ecosystem. So I actually think it's great that they're doing that. Riot, I think they pride themselves to be at the forefront of having good regulations. I can only say that from a lawyer's perspective. When I started out in esports representing League of Legends players, we had rule books for the LEC and the LCS that were like 10 pages. We're now at 140 pages. Okay, like this is how much we have evolved over the past 7 years. And I think this is just a new regulatory challenge for Riot, and they're ready to take it on. And I think I think investigating and finding a good grounds for a decision is one thing, but I think Valorant, very much like other shooters, are just destined for betting fraud, honestly. And I think Riot is probably setting themselves up to really challenge this, to really approach this comprehensively.
Yeah. But with that though, with because the biggest tagline is, "Oh shit, people see the FBI and they're already scared," and FBI, you're already linking to North America. Is it getting potentially could get bigger than that, where now you want to involve like Interpol or whatever, because the match fixing could be happening very very much globally. So does EU have a free pass at this point, and they can watch it from like, "Oh shit, don't do it again," or is there something they should be worried about too?
Yeah, well, match fixing happens around the globe. There is really no limitation to that, and I would probably think that these networks usually span around the globe. That you don't only target one small territory when you're looking at committing betting fraud. It's really like that. And then on the other hand, just so you know. ESIC and others, publishers probably as well, are also, you know, prepared for this type of war on the prevention and detection side. This is why publishers and tournament organizers team up with companies like Sports Radar, you know, where you basically, you don't do anything else but monitor the data in connection to matches, and you can usually pretty easily see if something unusual is going on in the betting behavior with regards to a game. And that's, of course, less complicated, I think, from an investigative point than, you know, proving that a player played a bad match. However, I would say probably experts, and I'm for certain not an expert in Counter-Strike or Valorant, but usually people can tell you, it's like, what, like, you know, when there is an unusual match, like what the fuck is going on? You know, why is someone running around like an idiot on the map? So yeah.
Yeah. Because there are Canadians involved in that too, right? So that's why I wanted to ask that question too. So it's or not. I'm not saying the Canadians are involved, but rumored to be involved in it as well, as we're still waiting for confirmation for that. So small fears there, right?
Yeah, it's probably a cross-border problem, and yeah, honestly, I think the better the investigation is now, and you know, the more transparent the outcome, the better, you know, we will be able to tackle this in the future. Because otherwise, you will always have the fear that, you know, this is like a Damocles sword over you know, the integrity of our game, and that really sucks, honestly, because that's a threat to our entire ecosystem.
Of course.
But I wanted to add something else to the education, because I think it's quite interesting, you know, what also the chat says, and that players snooze through the education, and I think that's probably only true to a certain extent. I know that ESIC has this educational program they do with teams that are, for example, participating in ESL tournaments. So there will be an education where about, you know, the negative consequences. And back in the day when I represented Joey Schlosser, you know, there was actually a case where it's about $100, you know, damage. We were trying to go route that was all about, you know, redemption as well. You know, he offered a couple of things to Valve, of course, you know, without any success, but, you know, he wanted to, but he also wanted to participate in the education, and I thought that was a very bold move. So he actually agreed to do a comprehensive interview to tell other players what it actually did to his career, and how it really destroyed any aspiration he could ever have. And honestly, I think this video is still online on YouTube. It's heart-wrenching when you watch it. It's like, I think if I was, you know, a competitive player, I'd be like, holy shit, you know, I better watch out, and you know, be careful not doing that. It's not worth it.
I think it'll be important for actually, if we could find that video, Anna. So if you could find it, link it to us, so we could probably tweet it out on Valoranting's Twitter and all of ours. I at least I will, because if ESIC is currently running these things, I can post it here in the
chat. All right, or is it allowed to post links?
Yeah, you can. You could do it on the chat.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe the Twitch chat. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think in general it's just because, you know, if ESIC is running these things with ESL, for example, right? I think it's a great step. And I think at that point, your players are like, they're like, oh crap, I made it. But there's still like such a huge pool of players that are still trying to make it pro, that they want to go by all means necessary sometimes to make it. And when they don't make it, they're trying to find other means to make money, which is why we're having these issues of match fixing, for example, and these scandals that may happen. So I think it's important for us to take that video, and or also what ESIC is currently doing with educating the population through the amateur scene and not only the pro scene.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the amateur scene, you're touching such an important point, right? Because I think most of us are usually involved only at the very top. It's the top pro scene, and that is usually the scene where you will not find as much corruption. Why? Because players are making more money. They are
Exactly.
very publicly visible, so they're already big. So it's really the risk of damaging a career you've already built is immense. Whereas in the amateur scene, I think what many kids will think is just like, hey, this is just maybe we play like, I don't know, 10th division ESL something.
I'll never check.
Meisterschaft. That's where it happens.
Yeah, exactly. Who cares? But the thing is, no matter whether you play 10th division, Meisterschaft, or the League of Legends World Championship, the damage to the integrity is always the same. So we really have to fight on every level that this doesn't happen. But again, it's like we're just at the very beginning of this. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed. While it is still the Wild Wild West, I'm impressed by people like Ian Smith, who is the commissioner of ESIC, who founded the organization very early on and who understood that need, and stakeholders who are members in there, but also some other publishers who are now working, for example, with Sports Radar, that overall the industry does understand that this is a huge threat and we have to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that, Anna, as well. Those that are interested, obviously, at Bristol Lawyer is Ian Smith, and it's one of the places you can sort of follow the doings of ESIC as well. Anna, thank you so much for your time. I think this has been really enlightening, and obviously, it's such a multifaceted topic. We've attacked it from so many different angles. For those that are, are interested in sort of in your work in the space or in your involvement with ESIC, where can people sort of follow you, or alternatively or additionally go to sort of keep updated in what's going on with this current case as it develops?
All right. So, I mean, first you can follow me on Twitter. I'm kind of, hurt to see that everybody here has, his Twitter handle, and I have my title.
Twitter handle?
No, why is it not at Anna Baumann? Like, this is, guys, what's going on here with protection? Of course. So,
I'm typing it in chat.
Thank you. I tweet quite a bit at Anna Baumann. And then, of course, when it's about following generally integrity matters and what's going on with ESIC, yes, you should follow at Bristol Lawyer. That's Ian Smith. You can also follow ESIC. I'm not sure what their handle is, but that's really where you get all the updates with the ongoing
ESIC
cases.
_official, correct, is their handle.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's what I can really recommend. But then, of course, you have lots of great esports publications who report on this. And last but not least, your great show. I was very happy to be part of.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think I speak for all of us when we're very pleased to have a chance to speak to you about this and get some of your insights. Anna, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. And yeah, maybe we catch up somewhere down the line. Maybe Boogaloo opens their doors once again. But
well,
yeah,
we'd
all the
love
best.
to. Ciao, guys.
Thanks, Anna.
You.